Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to talk with you about the best natural ways to deal with strains, sprains, tears, and even breaks. So we're talking about muscles, tendons, ligaments, and bones. So if you were following my community post and maybe some of my this and that videos, you might know a more recent sprain that I got on my foot. I'm actually not certain what exactly to label it as because it's a little different than any other type of tear that I've had. But what you need to know is that being one who's been in dance and martial arts, dance from the time I was 5, and martial arts since my mid-30s, which is about 20 years ago, I am quite familiar with dealing with sprains and strains of various different types on various different parts of my body. I've had a very bad sprain right here on my wrist. I've had sprains on my pinky fingers, my forefingers. Those ones were all from martial arts. On my knees, my ankles, I've broken a couple of toes, and I've pulled muscles in my legs, probably every muscle in my legs at some point in my life. A lot of times just simply from overstretching. As such, I have learned the best ways of dealing with this stuff naturally. I've also had many of my dance students or even martial arts students get, because it just happens. It's par for the course when you're doing such things that you're going to sprain or strain something, doing some kind of activity. And then now, at my age, most of my strains and sprains happen in the summertime when I'm out gardening and I step funny. And so this one was a little different in the fact that it's kind of a long story, but I already had a very mild strain of some sort on that same foot that I was, trying to care for, but I kept re-injuring it because I kept stepping in the same hole or whatever out there and forgetting about it and then doing it again. Then what happened was, even while I was still trying to heal that up, I went on it and it was doing fine, but then I went and stepped off the deck out into the garden and again stepped funny, and they were actually in a pair of boots that I didn't feel quite comfortable in anyway and had considered tossing, and sure enough, my ankle folded over. Well, the funny thing was I didn't actually sprain my ankle. It was that part in my foot that goes from the top of the arch down under to the bottom part of the arch, mostly along the side. And I ended up with a lot of swelling more on the bottom of the foot rather than on the side or on the top like I would have expected. And it was probably one of the most painful strains I've ever had, next to the bad one that I got on my wrist where I actually had to wear a splint for like 2 weeks. But in all of that time, and even every time something like this happens, I always learn a little bit more and a better way of doing things. Now, 2 years ago, I had broken a toe. It was a toe that I'd broken dance many years prior, and I re-broke it, and I can't remember how I did it this time, but I came up with my own herbal soak, and I did a video on that, which I'll link to down below, and it was quite effective at speeding up the healing process of that broken toe, and definitely healed much quicker than when I broke it the first time. In fact, I couldn't believe within a couple of days how little pain I had from a broken toe. And trust me, I know the difference between a strained toe or sprained toe and a broken toe. So this time around, I had some other methods I could also turn to. And one of the first things I did was that same soak, because that soak I came up with wasn't just for breaks, it was also for sprains. And it was very effective. So the main ingredients in that soap, I use fresh comfrey, but if I didn't have fresh, I would use my dried comfrey. I used dried arnica flowers and either the magnesium bath flakes, which are magnesium chloride, and or the magnesium sulfate, which you'll find in your Epsom salts, which typically are a lot cheaper. I personally did not find a difference between the two. I've used them both. I found them both about equally as effective. So it's just a matter of choice. Typically you can get Epsom salts cheaper than you can something like this. But I'll link to these because this was a pretty good deal for the size bag. This was an 8-pound bag right here, whereas most of the time when you buy Epsom salts, they're in about a 4-pound bag. But still, price comparison, this is cheaper than buying this. So it's just all up to you what's available to you. And usually for Epsom salts, you can find them in your local grocery store, in the pharmaceutical section, or at any drugstore. Then the other thing that I did on top of the soak, and did actually more often, was to use my homemade muscle and joint rub, because I know the ingredients I put in here, and a couple of the key ingredients in here are the arnica, the dried arnica flowers, and I used dried, whenever I'm doing an oil, always use dried comfrey that I had put in here, plus some essential oils, and I'd also had infused peppermint from my own garden in this. I didn't realize that when I first went to mix it. So I'm going to put the video to the muscle and joint rub down below, but I also want to make sure that you watch the update I did to that, because after I made that and I realized I also had peppermint in there, I came up with some even better ideas and found that without even adding essential oils to it, the infused oil on its own worked really good. So I will link to both of those and recommend that you watch them. But in this particular situation, it's the comfrey and the arnica and the hot pepper that is going to be the key ingredients to really speed up healing in a strain or any kind of tear that you're going to get in your muscles, your ligaments, and your tendons. In this particular blend, I also use turpentine. The purpose of the turpentine is to help, not only does it have its own benefits, but it helps carry the oil deeper into the tissues. And another that will do the same that I always forget to mention is Dmso. I don't always think to even use Dmso. I did try it a couple times, and yes, I could tell that it did also carry the oil, the infused oil, deeper into the tissue as well. So you may consider adding that to that. It's all up to you. It's inexpensive. You can typically find it in many places, online, in drugstores, and so on. It's usually easy to come by, usually in pet stores, especially for horses and various types of animals. Dmso is a popular choice for helping with many things. Then the other thing that is important is to have some kind of wrap. Now, ace bandages are fine. However, I highly recommend having an adjustable sort of neoprene wrap to use, whether it be for your knees, your wrists, your hand, your foot, your ankle. So right here, I've had to use these ones quite a bit because I'm typically doing something to my wrists. And the reason for having it be adjustable, something like this will work for either hand and any size person, because you can adjust it to fit you, and you can also adjust it to your situation. And I do have a pull-on one for my ankle, and it's fine as long as I wear it over a sock, because it's just a little bit too big. With the pull-on ones, you want to make sure you get the right size, and even then it may be a little too big or too small for what you need it for. And so I do also have some adjustable ones. These are just some real basic ones. I'm wearing one of these right now. I got a set of these, but I've had different types. I know I had another one. I'm not sure what happened to it. It had Velcro that wrapped around, and then it also had a longer, almost ace type bandage attached to it that you could wrap around. So that was more for an ankle sprain, because you could wrap it around as tight as you needed it. Now, why is the neoprene better? Well, the neoprene is better because it's going to help hold in heat, and heat is very important to the healing process. So the neoprene will help hold that heat in much better than an ace bandage will. And plus, these, though they are more expensive, they're going to last much longer. I've been using neoprene of all kinds, and these are just the best in my personal opinion, and through my great experience of having to deal with sprains and strains of all varieties. So now I want to get on to what I know people are probably already thinking. And that is, well, what about the RICE method? The rest, ice, compression, and elevation. That is what RICE stands for. That's usually what you're most commonly told by your coaches, your instructors, your doctors, whenever you look it up online. Rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Now, before I go on, I will say those do have their place, but it's going to depend on the severity of the injury. In most cases, the only things that I would use out of that would be the rest, because obviously you need to rest the appendage to some degree in order to give it a chance to heal, because if you keep using it, you're going to prolong the healing process and or re-injure it, which I've done many times. I had a sprained ankle that took the whole school year to heal because I sprained it right at the first day of dance class, and all clear up until summer, when I finally took the summer off from teaching dance, was when it finally healed up, because I couldn't stay off that ankle. Even with it wrapped, I kept re-injuring it while I was teaching class. So rest is very important. But you can speed up that healing process to the point where you can at least move around and do some of your basic stuff with little to no pain, as long as you're careful, by using these methods I've done here. Now let me come back to the ice and the elevation, and even the compression. The compression has its place, but more for the sake of support for the injury. So especially if you're talking about a wrist or an ankle and you need to keep it supported and somewhat immobilized, not too much, somewhat immobilized, so that you're not re-injuring it. That's the main purpose of a wrap. It's not for the sake of the compression to keep the swelling down, but in order to give it the support that it needs, and also for the sake of the heat that it's going to help generate in those tissues. A lot of you following me probably have already come to the conclusion that, why are we trying to reduce a fever when the fever serves a very important job in helping you recover from some kind of illness? The fever is meant to raise the body temperature, because it's that heat that's going to kill off the viruses and or bacteria that are making you ill and help you sweat out whatever is in there. So it's detoxifying your body. Fevers are very important. Yes, they are uncomfortable. And yes, just like with swelling, they can get to a point where your body overreacts and it goes too far and your fever can get too high. Only then should a person be trying to lower the fever, but not all the way back down to normal, because you need to let a fever run its course in order to heal faster. And I found this from my own experience. The very last time I ever had the flu, I got the fever. I did nothing to try to reduce the fever. I let it run its course. Yes, it was horribly uncomfortable with the puffiness and the headache and the chills and the hot sweats and all that I had to deal with. However, I found I recovered much quicker than probably ever had before when I was taking things to lower my fever in previous illnesses. That same principle applies to swelling. So the reason when you get an injury, there's a purpose for that swelling. Your blood is quickly moving to that area to provide heat and white blood cells that are going to repair those tissues. So by icing it and elevating it and compressing it in such a way to reduce the swelling, you're actually prolonging the healing process. So typically they'll say do the rice method in the first 1 to 2 days of the injury, maybe even 3. Well, I disagree. Now, if you feel you really need to help with the pain, do a little ice for a short period of time, that's one thing. But you need to allow that swelling to happen. Yes, it can be uncomfortable. Yes, it can be painful, but it's that heat that is needed. This is why a good hot herbal soak with Epsom salts or your magnesium chloride, that's one of the ways it works to help speed up the healing process, because it's providing heat that is needed to heal that area. Plus, with these other things in there, that heat's going to open up the pores and cause the magnesium and the herbs to be able to get deeper into the tissue to help speed up the healing process as well. So you got to look at everything. Sometimes we have to learn how to think outside the box and think, okay, why is my body reacting this way? Why is my blood pressure up? Do I need to run to the doctor and get on blood pressure medicine, or do I need to find out what's the source? Because blood pressure, elevated blood pressure, has a purpose in helping you deal with whatever's going on either in your body, be it internal stress or external stress. Your blood pressure rises to counteract that, to deal with that. There's a purpose for it. So all of these things have a reason. And so instead of medicating necessary body functions or trying to reduce them. We need to learn what is causing them and what the purpose of them is. Then also find out for yourself, don't just trust what I'm saying, but don't also just trust what a medical doctor is saying to get you on some kind of medication. Figure out what is the problem, how severe is it, and how best to deal with it. That's what I try to do. I like to see what does a medical thing have to say. So when I looked up swelling, the purpose of swelling, I actually went to a medical site, which is exactly what I expected, why the rice method is not best for all sprains and should only be used when absolutely necessary. So that was actually a medical site, not just a natural living type site, not a place like mine. So you got to take all these things into consideration and then learn what's going to be best for you. I'm not saying don't go to your doctor and get some advice, but ask questions and be very honest and tell them what you've learned and say, is this that bad that I have to get on this medication or use this method that you're prescribing when it's my body's natural function to do this? If it's something like blood pressure or whatever, then say, what could be causing my blood pressure to go up? Is there something you should be looking for rather than trying to medicate something that's a symptom of something else? So again, think outside the box, take all these things into consideration. Remember, I am not a doctor. I'm not trying to give medical advice per se. What I'm doing is sharing with you what works for me and what has worked for me for years. And in all cases, all the time, I very rarely ever iced an injury. I always went to heat because to me that always seemed the best way, because I always have known that heat is the fastest way to heal such an injury like this. So again, just take what I'm saying and compare that against other things that you're looking up and against what your doctor says, and then you got to find what's best for you. Now, I've never had a broken appendage where I've needed a cast, and the other night I was in a lot of pain thinking I might need to go to the doctor for this, but that was just because that was part of the healing process. So pain is involved in that, and I did take a little bit of feverfew to help with the pain, but not too much, because feverfew is also helps reduce inflammation, and I wasn't necessarily trying to do that. But here I am at the day that I'm actually shooting this video. The injury happened only a few days ago. I'm standing on both feet equally. I still, when I'm walking, I still try to take care. I still have the foot slightly braced, not too tightly, just to give it a little support to help prevent me, to remind me to be careful on it, and to also prevent me from further injuring it. But as much pain as I was in the other night, I'm surprised I'm walking on it today. And I'm really pleased with how fast my methods, every time I hurt myself, I find a better way and more ways to speed up the healing process. And again, yeah, rest is very important. Oh, and one more thing I wanted to say about the compression. When you're wrapping any part, you've got to realize that even though rest and compression can be an important part, you also need to have occasional amounts of movement. Too long without moving that can, again, just like with the ice, can prolong the healing time. You have to slowly introduce movement and add a little bit here and a little bit there. Only do as much as you think you can handle and be very careful, but that movement is also going to help prevent atrophy and to help speed up healing if done properly. Obviously, it means I'm not going to go out there and start jogging and climbing up and down ladders. As soon as I was able to walk a little bit, I would walk, but with care and with it wrapped and not trying to push it. As soon as it started to hurt, then okay, it's time to rest. All right, well, I hope you found this video helpful. Don't forget to check out my recipe videos I'll be putting in the description box down below. And again, take all these things into consideration and don't just go by what the book says, the standard. Here, this is what everybody should do, because not every situation is the same. Not every injury is the same. There are other and better ways to help speed up healing. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.